Welcome to Demon Sleep. I'm here to help you unwind tonight. If you enjoy this space, feel free to like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It makes this feel like a shared night across the world. These stories are different and I'm glad you're here. Dim the lights, let the room settle, and let's begin. Story 1, What the Lens Witnessed. She kept her eyes on the screen, not on him. The camera light was already glowing red when Leo's body betrayed him. Calling it a seizure would have made it sound survivable. Clinical. This was something else entirely. His back bowed in a slow, impossible arc until bone met bone, shoulder blades grinding together with a dry snap that echoed off the basement walls. The noise tearing out of his throat wasn't a scream. Screams need breath. This was pressure. Something shoving its way through flesh that had never agreed to be a doorway. 1 minute. That was the rule. Riley knew because she'd memorized it before the page vanished. The ritual had lived on a forgotten corner of the internet, buried in threads full of jokes and dare culture until it was wiped clean. The ban notice came fast, too fast. Immediate danger to users, the moderators said, right before deleting every trace, except the screenshots Riley had saved. Salt, 4 candles, 1 person willing to step aside. Not die, just move over. Whatever answered the call was allowed 60 seconds inside a living body. No more. According to the comments, before they disappeared, some volunteers felt bliss so intense they cried afterward. Others laughed until their mouths filled with red foam. Leo didn't hesitate. He never did. The moment Riley asked for someone to step forward, his hand went up, sharp and eager, the same way it used to in class when teachers asked questions designed to expose ignorance. Leo always wanted to be helpful, to turn being overlooked into a purpose. The basement smelled like neglect, old rubber mats from Riley's dad's abandoned weight bench, rust, and something acidic trapped forever in concrete. Leo sat in the salt circle, legs folded, shoulders slumped inward like he was trying to make himself smaller. His shirt was too young for him, a faded superhero logo from a childhood he never quite grew out of. Trends passed him by. So did friendships. So did the subtle signals that told most people when they were no longer wanted. Nora noticed all of it. She always had. They'd been inseparable once back when strange meant curious, when collecting rocks was charming instead of a social liability. She stopped sitting with him years ago. Everyone did. It wasn't malice. It was efficiency. Friend groups trim themselves the way bodies shed useless weight. Riley struck the first match, then the second. North, south, east, west. She mixed them up, but the instructions hadn't warned against mistakes. Just order. Precision wasn't required, only intent. The words tasted wrong in Riley's mouth. Ancient syllables crushed into something almost pronounceable. She motioned for the others to echo her. They did, voices colliding out of sync. Nora joined in too, heat creeping up her neck from embarrassment more than belief. Then the room changed. Not colder, not darker. Denser. The air resisted movement, thick with an unseen pressure, like wadding through water that refused to behave like water. Nora's phone caught it first, the way the space around Leo began to shimmer, not shadowed but grainy, like static crawling across a dead channel. Leo gasped, and then his body folded backward, spine bending beyond human permission, that awful sound ripping free as the countdown on the phone hit 60 and began to fall. Riley's phone rang out into the silence. 60 seconds on the dot. Leo collapsed forward, his face striking concrete with a dull, final sound. No one caught him. Blood spilled from his nose and crept toward the salt line, stopping cleanly at its edge, as if even gravity understood the rules. When he raised his head, his eyes locked onto the room with unsettling precision. Gone was the soft blur he'd always carried. This gaze landed, stayed. The blood smeared on his lip looked almost deliberate, like a prop he hadn't bothered to wipe away. When he spoke, his voice sat lower, subtly altered but enough to register in the chest. They helped him upstairs. He washed up in Riley's bathroom while the rest waited outside the door. The water ran far longer than necessary. When he stepped out, Nora noticed it immediately, his posture, shoulders squared, chin lifted. He held eye contact just long enough to test people. He smiled at Caitlin, who once told him he breathed too loudly, and she smiled back before realizing she'd done it. Monday arrived wearing Leo's face, but none of his history. He walked into school like the building belonged to him. The quarterback stopped him in the hall, palm landing on Leo's shoulder with that familiar claim-staking confidence. Nora watched from her locker as they spoke. 90 seconds. That's all it took. By lunch, Leo sat at the senior table. By Wednesday, an account called Leo Glow Up had thousands of followers. Nora couldn't stop watching him. It felt like observing a foreign film with no subtitles, recognizable shapes, unfamiliar meaning. He laughed before jokes finished, anticipating timing he'd never grasped before. But the laugh ended too cleanly, clipped like a sound effect triggered on cue. His clothes hadn't changed, same flannels, same torn jeans, but the way he wore them did. Not careless, intentional. People gathered around him. Teachers called on him, and he answered with an ease that bordered on unsettling, dropping references to books Nora knew he'd never touched. At the soda fountain, she watched him build a drink with exact ratios, movements stripped of hesitation. No spills, no corrections. When the cup wobbled, his hand adjusted without panic, as if the outcome had already been calculated. He smiled at the quarterback's girlfriend and held the expression a beat too long after the conversation moved on. Teeth still showing, eyes following something else entirely. By Thursday afternoon, Nora began to understand the truth she'd been avoiding. Whatever had borrowed Leo for that minute had learned how to stay. Nora sat 3 rows behind him in AP history, while Mr. Garrison droned on about treaties and borders that redrew the world. Leo's phone vibrated on his desk. He glanced down and smiled. In Garrison's class, that alone should have been unthinkable. The laugh that followed slid straight through Nora's chest, cold and misplaced, like something lodged where it didn't belong. She watched him blink. Once. Pause. Twice. Pause. The timing was flawless. Too flawless. Like a metronome quietly deciding how long a human eye was allowed to stay wet. That night she texted him, just a simple question, "Are you okay?" The reply came instantly. "Never better." The words glowed on her screen, bright and cheerful, and made her stomach turn. They felt alive somehow. Crawly. She wanted to swipe them away like bugs. Friday night brought a party at Jackson's house. Leo didn't arrive early or hover at the edges the way he used to. He came late, flanked by 3 people Nora didn't recognize, older, confident. The kind of guests who didn't ask permission to exist. College kids, maybe. They treated Leo like an old friend. Riley had asked everyone to record everything. Documentation, she called it, evidence, so Nora filmed. Her phone caught Leo by the pool, flipping someone's car keys through his fingers while a crowd leaned in. It caught him behind the counter mixing drinks with practiced speed. It caught him dancing. Leo, who'd avoided every school event since middle school, moving like rhythm wasn't something he learned, but something that had always known him. The camera caught something else too. Nora didn't see it at first. She noticed it Sunday afternoon, transferring clips to her laptop, deleting videos to free space. One file, barely 40 seconds, made her stop. Leo stood on the patio talking to Caitlin and two senior girls. Ordinary footage. Smiles, gestures, laughter. She paused it, rewound, played it again. At the edge of the frame, half swallowed by the reflection in the sliding glass door, stood something wrong. A figure you could see through, thin as fog but stubbornly shaped. Roughly Leo's size. It wore what looked like his old shirt, the one with the faded logo from childhood. Its face was hidden behind its own hands. Not hiding, pressing, like it was forcing something back in. Nora froze the frame, advanced it one click at a time. The figure didn't change position, but it shifted just enough to stay beside Leo, keeping pace like a shadow cast by a light source that didn't exist. Her pulse climbed. She opened another clip. The kitchen. The figure stood behind Leo, one arm extended toward his shoulder. The hand stopped inches short, hovering, as if an invisible barrier refused to let it touch him. Another clip, the living room. It sat beside him on the couch. Its mouth was open now, wide, hands lowered. Whatever it had been holding inside was getting tired of being quiet. If it had been screaming, if screaming were possible, it showed in the shape of its mouth. Wide, strained, soundless. By the pool, the thing stood half sunk into the concrete patio, occupying the exact place Leo had stood moments earlier. It couldn't share the same space. Instead, it was pressed downward, displaced like liquid pushed out by something heavier taking its place. In every clip, in every angle, it followed him, reaching, hovering, trying. Nora's phone vibrated. A message from Riley asking if she was coming over tomorrow. Another from Leo, casual, friendly, inviting her to hang out like nothing in the world was wrong. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She looked back at the laptop. In this frame, Leo was accepting a drink from Jackson, smiling easily. Behind him, the translucent figure wrapped both hands around Leo's throat. The fingers sank past skin, past the outline of muscle, disappearing into the empty space where a windpipe should have been. Leo's smile never faltered. Nora replied to Riley with a half-truth, said she felt off. Riley answered exactly as expected. Nora always felt off, then asked what was wrong with the videos. Nora stared at the question, at the impossible distance between what she could say and what Riley would ever accept. She typed nothing, locked her phone. That night she watched everything. Every second she'd recorded since the ritual. The figure was always there. Sometimes it lingered far back, barely more than a distortion mistaken for shadow. Other times it stood close enough for her to see its face. Leo's face. Younger, perhaps, or hollowed out, wearing the same emptiness that had once lived in his eyes before something else moved in and taught him how to look straight through people. In a clip from Wednesday morning, shot in the school hallway, the figure stood directly in front of the camera, its hands pressed flat against the lens, as if the glass were a barrier. She could see lockers through its palms. Its mouth moved. Nora turned the volume all the way up. All she heard were lockers slamming, students laughing, Riley complaining about homework. Beneath it all, barely there, was something else. A low, strained sound. A hum. A plea stretched thin. The noise of someone shouting into a world that refused to carry their voice. She rewound it. Played it again. As the translucent hand passed directly in front of the lens, the image glitched. One single frame fractured into green and purple static, The audio snapped, sharp, electrical, violent. It wasn't just trapped in the footage. It was fighting the footage. Monday morning, Leo said they should do the exchange again. Properly this time. More people, the complete ceremony. Same basement. Even after Riley's mom had cleaned over the weekend, the air still smelled wrong, chemical freshness failing to smother something living beneath it. Something that had soaked in too deep. Leo stretched out across Riley's father's abandoned bench press, limbs relaxed, claiming space the way he never used to, like he belonged anywhere he chose to be. The rest of them stood around him, uneasy. And for the first time since all of this began, Nora understood something with terrifying clarity. Whatever had been pushed out was still here, and it wasn't done trying to get back in. They sat on the basement floor around him without realizing they were doing it, bodies forming a loose circle in quiet submission. Leo spoke calmly, explaining that he'd done more research. What they'd attempted before, he said, was a shortcut, a beginner's version. The true exchange had layers, phases, potential. Imagine what they could become. Riley nodded before he finished the sentence. Jackson leaned in, eager now, asking questions like a customer ready to buy. He hadn't been part of these gatherings before Leo changed. Now he never missed one. The materials would be the same, Leo said. Nothing exotic, but this time everyone would participate. 5 people, 5 openings, 60 seconds each. Nora asked the only question that mattered. What happens after? Leo turned to her. His gaze didn't carry anger or threat. It carried nothing at all. She recognized that look, not cruelty but assessment, like checking a device to see how much usefulness it had left. Then we're improved, he said. That night Nora combed through her phone again, slowly, carefully, every image taken since the ritual. In the hallway at school, the figure appeared in 3 frames, closer in each one. In the cafeteria, it stood on top of an empty table, arms spread wide in a posture too deliberate to be coincidence. In the parking lot, it pressed against the passenger side window of Jackson's car, its face warped by glass, desperation smeared across its features. Nora zoomed in. The mouth was open. She thought she saw letters forming. A word, help, or maybe please. When she enlarged it further, the image broke apart into colored blocks, meaning dissolving into pixels. Her phone rang. Leo. She let it ring until it gave up. 10 seconds later, a message arrived. They needed to talk. About what, she typed. The response came instantly. She already knew. She said she didn't. He mentioned the videos. She asked what about them. The reply hit like dropped weight. Delete them. Why? 3 dots blinked for half a minute before the answer appeared. Because I asked nicely. Nora locked her phone, unlocked it, locked it again. Outside, a dog barked. A car passed. The world stayed ordinary. The kind of neighborhood where disasters were small and scheduled. Divorces, rejection letters, the occasional tragedy briefly mourned before everyone moved on. She opened her laptop, found the backup drive, copied everything, every clip, every image. If he wanted it gone, it needed to exist somewhere safer. Tuesday morning, Leo didn't come to school. Absent, the office said. His first missed day since the exchange. Nora checked her phone between every class. Nothing. No messages, no threats, no reassurance. At lunch, Riley caught her by the vending machines. Leo had called her the night before, Riley said. told her Nora was uncomfortable being recorded, said it would be better if everyone deleted the party footage out of respect, out of kindness. Riley looked relieved, grateful even. Nora felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Because Leo wasn't asking anymore. He was tidying up. Riley's face showed nothing but relief. Of course it made sense. Leo's sudden concern felt considerate, even sweet, not alarming. When Nora refused outright, Riley sighed and asked her not to make things uncomfortable. Leo was being reasonable, mature about it. Then Riley added, almost casually, that Leo wanted everyone over after school. His parents wouldn't be home until Thursday. Tonight would be perfect. They could finally do it right. Nora asked why it had to be tonight. Riley's phone vibrated before she could answer. She glanced down, smiled, and looked back up. Leo wanted them there by 8. Why delay? Jackson was bringing what they needed. Caitlin was already in. And somehow, without remembering when or how, Nora had agreed too. Leo's house sat at the edge of the subdivision, where neat lawns gave up and the land went feral. Uncut trees, a drainage ditch that overflowed every spring, a place caught between intention and neglect. Teenagers loved places like that for all the reasons parents tried not to think about. His father was always traveling. His mother stayed in her bedroom most days, a heaviness that passed for fatigue until you noticed it never improved. They met in the garage. There were 5 of them now. Leo had changed the space completely. The clutter of forgotten tools and box junk was gone, replaced with something deliberate, clean, almost elegant, candles already set. A salt circle poured wide enough to hold them all. It looked less like a garage and more like a room designed to be used. He walked them through it calmly. 6 positions, arranged in a precise shape. He'd printed diagrams. Electrical tape marked excess on the concrete floor. He spoke the way people do when they've rehearsed something important alone many times. The entry would be simultaneous, 60 seconds. When the timer ended, the spirits would leave. This time, everyone would rise together. Nora asked the question she couldn't stop herself from asking. Rise to what? Leo smiled. It didn't reach his eyes, it never had. She realized that now. The smile was something placed on his face, practiced, worn like a mask shaped almost correctly. Better, he said. Jackson focused on the candles. Riley double-checked the salt line. Caitlin kept texting, laughing softly at whatever came back. Ordinary behavior. Familiar. Comforting if Nora's hands hadn't been shaking so badly she had to curl them into fists. She watched the footage again during study hall. Not the party, the beginning. The first ritual. Frame by frame. Leo's back bending, the darkness pooling, the exact instant something else took hold. There was one frame, so brief it vanished if you blinked, where 2 faces occupied his head at once, his features splitting, peeling back, something foreign pressing through from underneath before the camera stuttered and corrected itself. Then there was only Leo again. The wrong one. Riley touched Nora's arm and asked if she was okay. Nora said she needed the bathroom. They were about to start, Riley said, confusion creeping into her voice. Nora was already backing away, pulse roaring in her ears, because she finally understood what tonight was. Not an experiment, not a ritual, a handoff. Nora didn't stop. She crossed the garage, pushed through the connecting door, and stepped into the house. The kitchen felt wrong the moment she entered it. It smelled like nothing at all, not food, not cleaner, not dust. Like a picture of a kitchen instead of a place where anyone actually lived. She locked herself in the bathroom and pulled out her phone. The newest video loaded. Leo at school the day before, leaning against the lockers, talking to a freshman girl Nora didn't recognize. And there, clear now, unmistakable, stood the figure. No longer blurred, no longer half-formed. She could see its face. It wasn't afraid anymore. It was pleading. It was Leo. The real one. The boy who'd sat inside a salt circle, expecting 1 minute of weirdness before going back to a life that never fit quite right. The boy who never returned. Nora zoomed in. The figure's hand reached toward the freshman girl, not grabbing, not threatening, pushing, urging, trying to move her away from the thing wearing his body. A knock struck the door. Riley's voice followed, sharp with impatience, telling her to hurry up. Nora flushed the toilet for effect, ran the sink, waited until her breathing slowed. When she stepped back into the garage, they were already arranged. 5 marks on the floor, 5 bodies standing in place. 1 empty X. She said she'd changed her mind. Leo stood. The motion was too smooth, too exact. Human bodies didn't move like that unless they'd trained for years, or unless something else was pulling the strings from outside the flesh. "You don't get to," he said calmly. She laughed, forced and brittle, called it stupid, said she was leaving. She turned toward the door. Jackson stepped into her path, not threatening, just present, hands in his pockets, eyes glassy, distant, the same look she'd seen at the party. The look of someone who'd listened to Leo too long, absorbed too much, let a few words settle where they didn't belong. It felt accidental. It was. Leo's voice shed its false warmth. "You saw it," he said. Nora shook her head. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. "You've seen him." The garage fell silent. Riley and Caitlin glanced at each other, confused. Jackson shifted slightly, still blocking the exit. They didn't understand. To them, this was just Leo acting strange. Too intense. Maybe drunk. Definitely something they'd joke about later. Riley asked who he was talking about. Leo didn't look away from Nora as he answered. "The part that didn't fit," he said. "The part that got left behind." Caitlin laughed nervously. "Left behind where?" Leo gestured to himself. "The skin, the bones, the borrowed weight of a human shape." "Here," he said, "this body." And for the first time, Nora realized the ritual had never been about letting something in. It had always been about pushing something out. The exchange always worked the same way. Something entered, something left. What the instructions never explained was where the one that left was supposed to go. Sometimes it didn't go anywhere at all. Nora's throat tightened as the understanding finally clicked into place. She said it before fear could stop her. "You're not Leo." His answer came instantly, calm, certain, almost proud. "I'm better than Leo." The words settled over the room like dust after a collapse. Nora swallowed and forced herself to keep going. "You killed him." He shook his head, almost amused. "No, not dead." Then he gestured to the empty space beside him. "Here." Standing right next to him, for days, screaming, begging, trying to warn them, trapped close enough to touch but unable to be heard unless there was a screen, a lens, a machine willing to record instead of interpret. Nora pulled out her phone with shaking hands and opened the camera. She aimed it at Leo. On the screen, 2 figures stood side by side. One was Leo as everyone else saw him, solid, confident, comfortably occupying flesh. The other was the translucent shape, clearer now than ever, close enough that Nora could see tears tracking down a face she knew by heart. It reached toward her, mouth-shaping words sound refused to carry. "Show them," Leo said. She turned the phone. Riley squinted. Jackson leaned in. Caitlin let out a small, confused sound. They saw nothing. Just Leo. "What are we supposed to be looking at?" Riley asked. Leo explained patiently that not everyone could see. Some minds filtered, others recorded. Nora's recorded. She saw what the camera saw. That made her dangerous. The door behind Jackson opened. Not an exit. An entrance. 3 people stepped in. The same older kids from the party. The ones who'd arrived with Leo and acted like he'd always belonged to them. They moved with that same fluid precision, bodies obeying instructions humans weren't meant to know. Leo smiled again. This time, the expression reached deep behind his eyes. Recognition. He said they'd been gathering. The exchange was far more effective than anyone realized. 60 seconds was enough. 60 seconds and you stripped away everything inefficient. Fear, hesitation, guilt, all the weight that slowed you down. Nora asked what the things that came in actually were. His answer was gentle, almost kind. "What do you think?" She said the word anyway. Demons. He corrected her. Vocabulary mattered. They were simply life adapted to other conditions. They'd existed in the spaces between spaces for a very long time. Now they were here. And here was better. Riley started shaking her head, laughing weakly, asking if this was a joke, some insane prank. Nora told her to use her phone, record him, watch it back. Riley did. 10 seconds of footage. She watched the playback. Her face drained of color. The phone slipped from her hand and shattered against the concrete. Caitlin was already crying. Jackson didn't move at all, the stillness of someone teetering between violence and surrender. Leo looked around the circle, satisfied. Because now they could see. And once you saw, you were already halfway exchanged. The 3 older kids fanned out with practiced ease, sealing the garage, the door into the house, every route that might pass for an escape. Leo spoke like he was clarifying a misunderstanding. Tonight wasn't about becoming better. They already were. Everyone there had taken part in his exchange, spoken the words, opened the door. Participation didn't require possession, only consent. Tonight was about finishing the work. 5 more containers. 5 more of them learning to inhabit this world with its noise, an appetite, an endless talent for lying to itself. Leo leaned forward, his voice sharpened. "You think we want your bodies for the thrill of cheap beer or the feel of concrete under our feet?" he asked. "That's incidental." They had been starving in the quiet places, he said, watching humans squander themselves, wasting attention, wasting ability, wasting the rare miracle of being seen. Did they have any idea what it was like to exist without perception? To be unable to touch, change, or even register? "We're not invaders," Leo said softly. "We're an upgrade." One of the older girls stepped forward. She had Riley's build, Riley's haircut, Riley's clothes, like she'd studied Riley carefully before choosing a shape. She said they could cooperate. Or not. The outcome was the same. The only variable was how much pain filled those 60 seconds. Nora didn't argue. She said one word. Run. She didn't wait to see who listened. She grabbed the closest thing she could reach, a half-full paint can from Leo's father's shelves, and hurled it. It struck one of the college kids square in the chest and burst, coating him in blinding white. 3 seconds. That's all it bought her. She slapped the garage door button and dropped low, sliding under the rising door before it cleared her shoulders. Then she was outside. Driveway, street, neighbor's lawn, running without direction, only distance. Behind her, Riley screamed. There was a crash, Jackson fighting or falling. Nora ran. Her phone was already in her hand. She dialed emergency services, got the tone, tried to speak through burning lungs. My friends, someone's trying to hurt my friends. Leo Castellano's house. The voice on the line asked what kind of harm. Nora couldn't find language fast enough. They weren't who they looked like. There was a ritual they were. The operator cut in, asking if this was a crime or a mental health situation. Nora glanced down at her phone. On the screen, the call timer ticked forward. The operator's voice continued, and behind it, barely visible shapes moved, sliding through the frame, keeping pace. She looked up at the street. Nothing. Just lamps and lawns, and the quiet emptiness of a normal Tuesday night. She looked back at the phone. One of the shapes turned its head and looked straight at her. Camera staring straight back at her through the lens. Its eyes locked onto hers with awful precision, not wandering, not curious, acknowledging it knew she could see it, knew she was watching, and worse, it was watching her watch. The recognition snapped between them like exposed wire. Nora ended the call. They wouldn't help. They couldn't. How do you report that your friend isn't your friend anymore? That the person wearing his face is doing exactly that, wearing it? That souls can be displaced, swapped out like furniture, and no one notices except machines, except lenses, except the rare minds that don't edit reality down to something comfortable. Her car was parked 3 blocks away. The distance felt longer than it ever had. She ran. On her phone screen, the shapes kept pace, sliding along beside her. When she looked up, the street was empty. When she looked back down, 3 figures, maybe 4, matched her stride perfectly, maintaining space like predators conserving energy rather than chasing. She reached her car, dropped her keys, swore, grabbed them again. Door open, slam, lock, engine roaring to life. Something moved in the rearview mirror. Her breath caught. She raised the phone. The back seat wasn't empty. 2 translucent figures sat there, bodies angled toward her, expressions unreadable, interest, hunger, something worse. She could see the fabric of the seats through their legs. She drove anyway. Destination didn't matter, only distance, away from Leo's house, away from the garage where her friends were probably stepping into a salt circle right now, waiting for 60 seconds that would erase them from their own lives. Her phone rang. Leo. She answered on speaker. You can't run from this, he said, calm as ever. She told him to watch her. He explained they needed 5 vessels tonight. She was supposed to be one of them. Now they'd have to replace her, and replacements took time. Time they didn't have. She asked why tonight. He talked about windows, alignments, things easier to do than to explain. Miss it, and they'd have to wait a year. Good, she said. Wait. There was a pause. Then he said they could improvise. Riley's little sister would be home in 40 minutes. Dance class ended at 9:30. 12 years old. Probably wouldn't survive the exchange. Too young. consciousness not fully settled. But they needed 5. And urgency made people adaptable. Nora's throat tightened until she could barely breathe. He was telling her they'd be waiting at Riley's house, that Emma would walk into her own kitchen and find something wearing a college kid's face standing there. Leo's voice stayed gentle as he spoke, almost fond. Riley had mentioned the dance schedule last week. Funny how much people shared without thinking. Tiny details piling up. Emma's routine, the spare key under the planter, the window that never locked properly. The thing inside Leo's body knew everything Leo had ever known. Every passing comment, every careless word, every open door left unlocked by trust. The camera stared back at her. Not at the room, not past her, at her straight through the lens. Its eyes adjusted with deliberate focus, cold and intelligent. It knew she could see it. Worse, it knew that she knew. The awareness passed between them like a blade sliding under the skin. Mutual, immediate, sickening. She ended the call. They wouldn't help. No one would. How do you explain that your friend is no longer your friend? That something else is wearing him like a costume? That souls can be removed and replaced and the only witnesses are machines, cameras, screens, devices whose minds don't edit out the impossible. Her car sat 3 blocks away. The street felt longer than it ever had. She ran. On her phone screen, shapes kept pace with her, flanking her on both sides. When she looked up, the street was empty. When she looked back down, 3 figures, maybe 4, matched her stride perfectly, never gaining, never falling back. They weren't chasing her. They were hurting her. She reached the car, dropped her keys, fumbled them back up, yanked the door open, slammed it shut, locked it, started the engine. Movement in the rearview mirror made her freeze. She lifted the camera. The back seat wasn't empty. 2 translucent figures sat there, watching her. Their faces held expressions that might have been curiosity or hunger. She could see the upholstery straight through them. She drove anyway. Where she went didn't matter. Just away. Away from Leo's house. Away from the garage where her friends were probably still sitting inside that salt circle, waiting for 60 seconds that would erase them from their own lives. Her phone rang. Leo's name lit the screen. She answered on speaker. He told her she couldn't run. She told him to watch her. He explained they needed 5 tonight. She had been one of them. Now they needed a replacement, and replacements took time. Time they didn't have. Certain windows, certain alignments, miss it, and they'd have to wait another year. Good, she said. Wait. His voice softened. Or they could improvise. Riley's little sister would be home in 40 minutes, 12 years old, picked up from dance class every Tuesday at 9:30. Too young, really. The consciousness wasn't fully formed. She probably wouldn't survive the exchange. But desperation made rules flexible. Nora's throat closed. They'd be waiting at Riley's house. Emma would walk into her own kitchen and find something wearing a college kid's face standing there. Leo spoke gently now, reminding her how Riley had mentioned the dance schedule last week. How convenient it was, how freely people gave away their lives in fragments. Spare keys, unlocked windows, routines. The thing in Leo's body knew everything Leo had ever known. Every harmless detail had been sharpened into a weapon. The instruction was simple. Come back, take her place in the circle. Emma stays untouched. Run, and Emma becomes vessel number 5. Her choice. The line went dead. Nora pulled over, hands shaking too badly to keep driving. She reopened the original footage, frame by frame. The moment Leo convulsed, the moment something entered him. In the background, barely visible, shapes pressed against a boundary she couldn't see. Dozens, hundreds, waiting. The ritual hadn't summoned one thing. It had opened a door. And Leo and the thing wearing him, had been holding it open for days. She thought of Emma, still sleeping with a nightlight. Of Riley, Jackson, Caitlin sitting in that circle right now. Of the real Leo, trapped outside his own body, following it helplessly, screaming through cameras no one watched. 11:47. 13 minutes. She could go home, lock the doors, let the world rot quietly, or she could go back. The drive took 8 minutes. Leo's house looked normal. Lights on, quiet, suburban. Nothing ever happened here except the slow decay beneath perfect lawns and friendly waves. 11:54. The garage door was closed. The handle was unlocked. They were expecting her. Inside, the circle was complete. Riley, Jackson, Caitlin, 2 other seniors. The college kids stood behind them, blocking every exit, candles burning, salt unbroken. Leo stood at the center, waiting. She demanded Emma be released. He smiled. That smile lingered too long. Emma was safe for now. Riley's mom had texted, the dance was running late, another hour. Leo barely reacted. The college kids already knew where the studio was. One call, 10 minutes. Emma would never even see it coming. So Nora would sit. Leo gestured to the empty place in the circle, the 6th point of the hexagon, an absence waiting to be filled. Nora stepped forward, phone still in her hand, camera live. On the screen, the garage was no longer empty. Dozens of shapes clung to the ceiling, smeared across the walls, pressed beneath the concrete floor. They watched with interest, or appetite, or something that felt like both. Beside each seated body was another figure, translucent, half-formed. Their expelled selves, the people they were about to stop being. Nora understood with a wave of nausea. These weren't future ghosts. They already existed, waiting in the thin space between moments, ready to be displaced the instant the exchange finished. Riley's future ghost was already screaming, hands clamped over its face in silent terror. 60 seconds, Nora said. Leo nodded. That's all we need. She looked at the phone, at the swarm pressing closer, at the real Leo standing beside his stolen body, his expression no longer panicked, just empty, resigned. Then she looked at the circle. The careful geometry, the perfect symmetry, the thin white salt line that promised control. I have one question, she said. Leo's patience thinned. Make it quick. The salt, Nora said. It keeps everything contained. What happens if it breaks? Leo's expression shifted. Not fear, not anger. Something older. Don't. Nora swung her foot. Salt scattered across the concrete in a wide, violent arc. The geometry collapsed. The circle died. On her phone screen, the shapes surged forward, not toward the living, not toward the victims waiting to be replaced, but toward the ones who had already crossed over. Toward the college kids. Toward Leo. Toward the vessels. The ritual hadn't finished. The door was still open. Breaking the circle mid-exchange did something far worse than release them. It exposed them, stripped away protection, made them visible to the things that hunted in the in-between. Leo screamed. not the calm, stolen voice. A real scream, raw and human, as something massive and translucent wrapped around him. On the screen, Nora watched the thing inside Leo being torn out, ripped backward, dragged toward the spaces it had crawled from. It fought, clung. It had been inside too long, woven too deeply into his mind. The college kids thrashed as well, bodies arching, mouths open, as the entities inside them surfaced, exposed, desperate, suddenly prey. The entities struggled to hold on to flesh that no longer belonged to them. Two of the college kids collapsed instantly, bodies hitting concrete, going limp the moment their passengers were torn free. The third kept screaming, clawing at the air, at nothing, until even that strength failed, and she folded forward like a puppet with its strings cut. Riley, Jackson, and Caitlin scrambled backward from the shattered circle, confused, shaking, still human only because the exchange hadn't finished. In the center of the garage stood the real Leo, transparent, discarded, watching. The thing that had stolen his life screamed as it was pulled out of him, resisting with a violence that shook the air. For a brief, impossible moment, Ghost Leo and Meet Leo occupied the same space, overlapping, misaligned, as the eviction tried to complete itself. But it didn't. The entity wouldn't fully release. It had been inside Leo for 7 days. 7 days of eating his food, sleeping in his bed, wearing his face, moving his hands, learning his rhythms. Integration had begun. The extraction stalled halfway. The thing was no longer in control, but it wasn't gone either. Anchored, embedded, trapped, 2 passengers in one body. Then Leo collapsed. When he lifted his head again, it was just Leo, or close enough. Eyes unfocused, breathing shallow, like someone waking up mid-surgery in the wrong room. "What happened?" he asked, his voice higher now, uncertain, his own. Nora did lower the phone. Through the camera, the shapes were retreating, pulling back into corners, thinning, dissolving. Whether the door had closed or the invitation had been revoked, she couldn't tell. 30 seconds later, the garage looked empty on the screen. Normal in real life. "It's over," Nora said. And later, after the screaming stopped, after Riley's parents came home, after Leo's mother finally emerged from her room, after nothing was deleted and everything was backed up to 3 separate drives, Nora watched the footage again. The final clip. Leo sitting against the garage wall, hands shaking as he touched his own face, pressing his fingers into his cheeks like he was confirming it was still there. And beside him, barely visible, no longer translucent, darker, denser, the entity hadn't been fully removed. The others had been vessels for hours, maybe a day. Their passengers were evicted cleanly. But Leo's had rooted deeper. A week of neural mapping, synaptic overlap, familiarity. Breaking the circle had disrupted control, but not presence, not possession, cohabitation. 2 minds, 1 body. The war wasn't finished. Leo looked up at the camera, at Nora, and smiled. One smile was his, small, shaken, painfully human. And beneath it, visible only through the phone screen, something else smiled too. Patient, waiting. He reached out and touched the camera lens, leaving a greasy blur behind. On the screen, 2 hands pressed against the glass. One solid, one translucent, both unmistakably his. Story 2, The Stepfather's Blade. The boy watched silently as his stepfather unloaded the packs at the trailhead, each motion precise, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Matches first, tent neatly folded into its stuffed sack, then the silver packets of freeze-dried meals rattling against the truck bed like distant chimes. Ethan wanted to ask where they were going, why they were doing this, but 3 years under Wade Cattrall had taught him that questions were weakness, and weakness had consequences. Only a few items remained. A single canteen, 2 hunting knives, leather sheets softened with years of use, and a coil of paracord frayed at the edges, carrying a history of endurance. Wade held each object up as if showing off relics, inspecting them in the late November light. The canteen caught the sun. He shook it, the lonely slosh of water echoing in the empty parking lot. Wade stood like a monument in boots and canvas jacket, shoulders stiff, unmoving. Weathered lines carved into his face told stories of wind, cold, and survival, age irrelevant. He was 52, though it didn't matter. Men like Wade didn't age. They hardened, layer by layer. Ethan, 15, soft from too much comfort and home cooking, read the look Wade gave him, disappointment tipping toward a kind of methodical resolve. A problem to be corrected. Wade didn't speak, didn't glance back, yet the message was unmistakable. Follow, learn, endure. This is what a man does. This is what God provides. So Ethan followed, his throat tight with words he could never say, the November forest rising around them like walls of pine and oak. Light filtered down in dusty shafts, falling like confetti through the canopy. A lone crow called somewhere distant, swallowed by the thick, silent air. Wade's boots struck the forest floor in a rhythm that seemed older than time, each step a pulse from a world that had forgotten music. He gestured at rocks, at moss-covered slopes, at trees, making statements that sounded half like scripture, half like instinct. Words tried to cling in Ethan's memory, phrases about declination, north-facing slopes, reading the land, but the meaning drifted, elusive as smoke. His legs burned after the first hour, lungs tasting metallic. Heavy, the pack on his own back pressed like a lead weight. Wade was smaller, lighter, already carrying lessons the boy could only guess at. And then Wade paused. Knives in hand, he crouched, pointing at a patch of earth, a tangle of roots. "This," he said, voice low, deliberate, "is where men start." Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't know if he was ready. He didn't know if anyone ever truly was. But the forest didn't care. The November wind didn't pause for him. And Wade never waited. The boy followed, step by step toward the unknown. Wade called it a crutch. A man who needs 40 pounds of gear to survive a week in the woods isn't worth the name, he said, voice low, like he was stating a law of the universe. Ethan thought about his father, gone when he was 12, just left one morning. Divorce papers 6 months later from Nevada. His father had been quiet, folded into the background, reading the paper, never raising a voice. Wade was different. Wade filled the world around him, not just a room. Presence, certainty, strength. Ethan's mother had seen that and been drawn to it. Ethan had seen it too, and saw in himself everything that was missing. The sun began its slow drop toward the ridge, golden and cold. Wade paused, pressing a hand to his chest so briefly Ethan almost missed it. Fingers splayed over sternum, as if checking for a heartbeat, or perhaps something else entirely. Then they reached a clearing. Granite outcroppings formed a natural windbreak. Moss clung thick to the north faces. A good sign, or a warning, Ethan couldn't remember. Wade set to work, gathering deadwood, efficient, precise, but something was off. branches stacked at impossible angles, a structure that looked right but would choke in flame. Ethan had seen this before. Wade fixing the kitchen sink, installing a ceiling fan. Absolute confidence. Incomplete knowledge. Disaster waiting to happen. He struck quartz against flint. Sparks danced, died. Again. 20 minutes passed. Ethan watched the jaw tighten, tendons rising like wire. Breathing shallow, fast. Hands trembling. A shameful, terrible spectacle, like seeing a parent break. Finally, a flame flickered, weak, guttering, a heat you could feel only if you touched it. Darkness fell like a theater curtain, cold and sudden. 15 degrees in 15 minutes. Ethan's nylon jacket, thin for city autumn, did little. His better insulated coat sat back in the truck bed with the rest of his useless gear. Wade drew the hunting knife, edge gleaming, testing it with slow, careful attention. Sharp enough. He stared at it too long, like a man checking to see if he still bled the right color. A drop of blood fell to the dirt, vanished. Then Wade looked at Ethan. And for a single heartbeat, something passed between them. A wordless understanding, a promise of the world to come. Tomorrow they would hunt. Tomorrow, Ethan would learn who he really was. Tomorrow, he would become something else. The air was sharp with November cold, biting through layers of worn clothing and hesitation. The boy felt it immediately, the unspoken truth hanging in Wade's gaze, the weight of the knife in his hand. This wasn't a lesson. It was a proving ground, a silent trial. Every glance Wade cast, every deliberate step told him the stakes. Fail, and he would be discarded. No tents, no sleeping bags, just the forest floor, pine needles and brittle leaves pressed against cold earth. Wade motioned with a sweep of his hand, a command that required obedience without words. Make yourself part of this place. Survive here or disappear. The boy scraped together a makeshift nest, but it was threadbare. Needles stabbed through his jeans, through his shirt, gnawing at his skin. The ground pulled heat from his bones like it had a mind of its own. He lay there, teeth chattering, listening to Wade's breathing, steady, almost predatory, across the faint firelight. Around them the forest whispered, branches groaning, unseen creatures stirring, wind threading through the pines with a sound like hushed laughter. Sleep claimed him at last, dragging him down into a weightless, suffocating darkness. When he surfaced, the stars were still thick overhead, cold points in the black sky. Wade shook his shoulder, alert, unyielding. His face looked sculpted from stone hewn in a different age, unyielding, unrelenting. Shadows clung unnaturally to the hollows of his eyes, darkened beyond the reach of the fire's glow. He moved to the edge of the clearing, body taut, breathing quick and shallow, the sound sharp like a dog in fear. He stood there, silent and still, staring into the night as if the darkness held answers no human should ever find. Minutes stretched, measured only by the boy's tightening chest. When Wade returned to the fire, his hands trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper, something raw. His gaze pierced the flames as if he saw specters hidden within, entities the boy could neither name nor comprehend. His lips moved silently, words directed at someone or something unseen. The boy wanted to speak, to suggest retreat, to admit that this was enough, but his throat locked. Speaking would give form to the impossible, would make reality bend toward the dark truth pressing against them. Morning arrived in gray whispers, cold and uninviting. Wade had already been moving, perhaps all night. His eyes, rimmed with raw red, bore the yellowed cream of fatigue. The fire, built higher now, smoldered and hissed, smoke swallowing warmth as if the wood itself resisted. Hunger gnawed at the boy's stomach, a dull reminder of yesterday's breakfast that already felt like a lifetime ago. Without a word, Wade plunged into the trees, boots striking the frost-crusted ground, leaving the boy no choice but to follow. He moved with purpose, faster now, a relentless drive threading every movement. The forest had become a crucible, a place where endurance and fear coiled together, and the boy knew in his chest that today he would be measured, not by what he learned, but by what he survived. The wind carried whispers that didn't belong, shadows that seemed to shift when his eyes weren't watching. Wade was already far ahead, but the boy's pulse synced to his steps, each one a silent promise: keep up or be left behind. And deep down, he wondered, not for the first time, if surviving Wade meant surviving the forest, or surviving the darkness that Wade had already learned to see. Wade moved like the ground owed him obedience, stepping over roots and slick stone without looking down. The boy chased his back through the trees, legs stiff, calves screaming, breath sharp and sour in his throat. His tongue felt coated in metal. Water burned in his thoughts, but the canteen hung from Wade's hip like a badge of rank. Asking for it felt like admitting defeat, and defeat was dangerous. An hour passed. No creek, no stream, nothing but dry leaves and shadow. The boy knew the numbers even if Wade pretended not to. Days without food were survivable. Days without water were not. Still, Wade pushed on, his path bending and twisting without pattern. Sometimes he stopped abruptly, turned in a slow circle, eyes unfocused, like a compass spinning without north. Then he chose a direction and marched forward with renewed certainty, as if the pause had never happened. The forest blurred into repetition. Pine, oak, fern, fallen logs half swallowed by moss. Everything looked familiar and wrong at the same time, like deja vu stripped of comfort. When Wade moved again, the boy noticed the sun riding the wrong side of his vision. They weren't heading back. They were going deeper. He almost spoke, almost suggested marking trees, breaking branches, anything to leave proof they'd been here. But Wade's shoulders had gone rigid, his posture drawn tight like wood about to split. The boy swallowed the words and followed. Hours dragged on. The land rose and fell cruelly, deadfalls to climb, gullies choked with thorn and rot to descend. Brambles tore at the boy's hands until his palms were wet and dark, the sting fatting into numbness. Hunger shifted from ache to clamp, a hard fist closing beneath his ribs. His mouth tasted like rust. Sound warped. His own heartbeat boomed too loud while snapping twigs seemed distant, unreal. When Wade finally stopped, it wasn't mercy. It was discovery. He crouched and pointed. Droppings. A scraped birch trunk. Fresh. His face sharpened, confusion peeling away to reveal something colder and more focused. The boy felt it like a change in pressure. They hid behind a fallen oak, bodies folded low. The ground leached warmth instantly. Minutes stretched, then longer. The boy's legs went numb. Above them, a squirrel skittered along branches, claws ticking softly, cheeks bulging with stolen acorns. The boy's mouth filled with saliva. Wade's breathing grew harsh, mouth open, dragging air like a man drowning on land. His grip whitened around the knife handle. Sweat dotted his forehead despite the cold. Then movement. A deer stepped into view 50 yards off, careful and unafraid, moving with the quiet confidence of something that belonged to this place. The boy felt a surge rise in his chest, hope tangled with fear, need knotted tight. Beside him, Wade leaned forward, eyes fixed, knife ready, breathing loud enough to betray them both. And in that moment, the boy understood something with terrible clarity. This hunt was no longer about food. It was about whether Wade could still prove he was a man, and whether the boy would survive being part of that proof. Meat, actual meat, Wade straightened with the care of a man lifting himself out of deep water. His entire body was shaking now. The boy could see it clearly, the tremor in his shoulders, the tremble running down his arm into the knife. Wade didn't aim. He hurled it. The blade spun through the air in a slow, awful arc, flashing once before slamming into a tree trunk well short of its mark. It dropped uselessly into leaves and rot. The deer's head snapped up. For a single suspended heartbeat, her eyes locked with the boy's, dark, alert, alive. Then she was gone, dissolving into brush and shadow like she had never been there at all. Wade stayed frozen, arms still outstretched, staring at absence. His face broke apart in stages, first disbelief, then fury, then something softer and uglier, a grief with no outlet. He walked to the fallen knife, lifted it, turned it over slowly in his hands, studying the metal as if it had made a personal decision to fail him. He swayed on his feet, just slightly, enough. That was when the boy knew, not suspected, knew. Wade didn't know what he was doing. The authority, the certainty, the lectures about real men and hard truths, it had all been costume. His stepfather wasn't leading. He was improvising. He was lost. Maybe he always had been. The boy kept his mouth shut. Inside his head, numbers and distances began arranging themselves without permission. How far back, how long they'd been walking, whether he could find the road alone, whether his body would let him try. That night Wade refused a fire. He made a vague motion at the dark and said smoke would give them away. Away to who? From what? The boy didn't ask. Wade's face had already sealed shut, expressionless as bark. They sat wrapped in darkness so thick it felt physical, pressing against the boy's eyes. He could hear Wade moving, standing, sitting, packing in tight loops. The forest listened back. Hunger changed shape inside the boy, stopped being pain and became company. It whispered. It suggested. It brought back the image of the squirrel, small and warm and full of energy, and made him calculate things he'd never wanted to calculate. Once Wade screamed, just once. A raw sound without language ripped free and then swallowed by the trees. Silence followed. The boy lay rigid, heart hammering, waiting for an explanation that never came. Only Wade's breathing remained, wet, uneven, breaking apart. Morning arrived without relief. Neither did the next. On the third day, Wade started digging. He'd found a shallow depression where rainwater had once gathered, the soil darker and looser. He used a flat stone like a shovel, throwing dirt behind him with frantic efficiency. The boy watched from a distance. Hunger had climbed higher now, moved into his chest, heavy and constant. The hole grew jagged and deep, too obvious, too useless. No animal would ever fall into it. The boy knew that. Wade didn't stop. Dirt packed under his nails. His breathing rasped, each inhale a struggle. When he finally climbed out, he stared at the pit as if seeing it for the first time. Something in his face went empty. All the tension drained away at once. Wade sat on the edge of the hole. And for the first time since they'd left the trailhead, he looked small. The boy dropped his face into his hands. For a moment he thought Wade might be crying, but there was no sound, no movement that confirmed it, only stillness. When Wade finally lifted his head, the boy saw him clearly for the first time. Not as a judge, not as a challenge to survive, but as a man running out of time. Wade's hand slid to his chest and pressed hard, as if he could hold something inside that was trying to escape. Confusion flickered across his face, raw, almost innocent. He stared at the boy like a stranger, like he was searching his memory for a reason they were here together. Then it vanished. The steel returned, that familiar, unbreakable resolve. Wade raised a trembling finger and pointed through the trees toward the ridge line above them. High ground. That was all that mattered. The boy moved without question and hauled him upright. Beneath the canvas jacket, Wade's arm felt wrong, too thin. The strength stretched into brittle cords. They climbed. The slope fought them every step. Shale slid beneath their boots, stealing balance. Fire burned through the boy's calves. His vision shrank, the world narrowing into a dark tunnel. They hadn't had water since yesterday morning. The canteen had gone dry long ago. Wade had taken the last swallow in the night. The boy had heard it, that frantic, greedy gulping. It took 4 hours. Every few minutes they stopped. Wade bent over, hands on his knees, lungs rasping like torn cloth. The boy watched and stayed silent. There were no words left that could help. At the top, the world offered nothing. Just forest, endless unbroken forest rolling to the horizon. No roads, no wires, no scars of civilization. The boy turned slowly, his stomach sinking. They could be anywhere or nowhere at all. Wade swayed near the edge. His lips were split and bleeding. Dried blood clung to the corners of his mouth. His hand went back to his chest, pressing harder this time, knuckles bleaching white. And then it happened. Something inside him gave way. The boy saw it. The exact moment whatever had been holding Wade together finally shattered. Wade collapsed onto a boulder, shoulders caving in, his body shaking as if the ground itself had betrayed him. The boy stood a few steps away, frozen. One part of him wanted to reach out. The other wanted to push. That night, Wade forced them to dig foxholes, growling and gesturing at the darkness as if it were alive, as if something was coming. The boy dug. Wade was weaker now, but not harmless. They lay buried in shallow pits, hidden beneath leaves and broken branches. 10 feet away, the boy listened to Wade breathe. Each rattling inhale sounded like wind scraping through dead reeds. And the forest listened too. Sometimes the breathing stopped. It would vanish for long, terrifying seconds, and the boy would lie there counting the dark, convinced that this time Wade was gone. Then the sound would return, thick, wet, dragged up from deep inside a failing body. Each breath felt borrowed. The boy stared into the dirt and imagined rescue. Helicopters tearing open the sky, search teams calling his name. But no one was coming. His mother believed they were at Baxter State Park, safe trails, ranger stations, clean campsites near the entrance. Wade had told her they'd pushed far beyond that, deep into the wilderness zone. No signal, no people, just miles of trees. 2 weeks, he said. She believed him. Wade was the kind of man people trusted with facts. 10 days would pass before anyone even realized something was wrong. 10 days was an eternity when you had no food and no water. The boy thought about his mother, about the hardware store where she worked, about how Wade had appeared in her life, steady, capable, solid, after years of emptiness, about the way she sometimes looked at her son, worried, as if she knew he needed something she couldn't give him. She believed Wade could. The last thing she said before they left echoed in his head. Be good, listen to Wade, learn something. He had nodded and climbed into the truck. Now he lay in a hole in the forest floor, while his stepfather died by inches somewhere nearby. He must have slept. When he woke, gray dawn seeped through the trees like ash settling after a fire. His body moved stiffly as he climbed from the foxhole, joints creaking, muscles slow to obey. Wade's hole was empty. For one bright, impossible second, the boy thought Wade had left, wandered off. chosen to die somewhere else, chosen to spare him. Then he saw the boots. They lay 20 feet away, half hidden by brush. The boy walked toward them, each step cautious, his heart misfiring inside his chest. His breathing came sharp and shallow, panic-driven, useless. Wade Cattrall lay on his back. His eyes were open, staring into nothing. One hand crushed against his chest, the other flung outward like he'd reached for something that wasn't there. His face had drained to the color of old stone. Nothing moved. No rise, no fall, no breath fogging the cold air. A single leaf rested on his cheek and did not stir. The boy stood there for a long time. A chipmunk darted across Wade's boot, paused, then continued on its way. The forest carried on without hesitation. Wind whispered through the canopy. Somewhere a bird called. The world did not care. Something inside the boy split cleanly in two. One part collapsed, sobbing so hard his body folded in on itself. Another part stayed cold and precise. Water first, shelter next, then the walk out however long it took. Another part felt relief so sharp it hurt. And another felt sick with guilt for that relief. He knelt beside the body and reached into Wade's pockets, his hands shaking, the forest watching in silence. There was nothing worth saving. A pocket knife with its blade snapped short. Loose change, quarters dulled smooth by years of pockets. A diner receipt folded once, stained with grease. The boy stared at the numbers. 23.49. Eggs, bacon, coffee. A full stomach on the first morning when hunger was still a distant idea instead of a voice living inside him. He started laughing. The sound tore out of him, sharp and ugly, bending him forward. His empty stomach seized in protest, pain flaring white-hot, but the laughter kept coming anyway. It scraped his throat raw. He couldn't stop it. When it finally broke, he wiped his face with shaking hands and unbuckled the hunting knife from Wade's belt. It nearly slipped from his fingers twice. The knife felt heavier now, not just metal responsibility, finality. He turned and walked away without looking back, choosing a direction that sloped downward. Water followed gravity. Everyone knew that. That was something real. He found the creek on the second day after Wade died, or the third. Time had softened, hours leaking into each other until they no longer held shape. The water was painfully cold, numbing his lips, making his teeth chatter. It ran clear over stones worn smooth by centuries of patience. He drank until his stomach cramped, then drank more. Filled the canteen, sat on the bank and tried to think. The survival shows said you could last weeks without food. That was theory. His body had already begun consuming itself. He felt it in the looseness of his limbs, the way standing required effort and repetition. His mind had become both razor-sharp and strangely slow, able to calculate distance and direction, yet unable to remember the day. Light burned at the edges of his vision, everything haloed like overexposed film. Smells overwhelmed him, pine sap, wet stone, his own sweat sweet and chemical wrong. That smell scared him. He thought about fish. There had to be fish. He sharpened a stick and tried to spear them, standing knee-deep in the creek for hours. His hands moved too late. His feet slipped. The fish darted away like liquid thought, like they knew what he would do before he did. After 6 hours, he collapsed on the bank, shaking. He tried to imagine what Wade would have done. Then the truth settled in. Wade would have died here too. All that certainty, all that authority, it had been a mask, confidence without skill. performance pretending to be knowledge. The boy was alone. He had always been alone. On the fourth day, or maybe the fifth, he turned back. He told himself he needed the paracord, told himself there might be something he'd missed. That was a lie. Some part of him knew it even as he walked. The clearing had changed. Scavengers had come. Crows, most likely. Maybe a fox. Wade's jacket was torn open. The skin beneath it had bloomed into colors the boy had no words for, purples and greens and blacks that didn't belong on anything that had once spoken. He stood at the edge of the clearing, breathing shallowly. He should bury him. That was what people did, what the old rules demanded. But the ground was hard. His hands were weak. Digging meant calories, and calories were a currency he no longer possessed. His body had stopped negotiating. It screamed now, a raw animal demand that bypassed thought entirely. His hands shook uncontrollably. His jaw ached from clenching. His mouth filled with saliva that had nowhere to go. The forest waited. And somewhere deep inside him, something ancient stirred. Something that did not care about rules, only about tomorrow. The brightness at the edges of his vision crept inward, bleaching the world until everything looked thin and unreal. The knife was already in his hand. He couldn't remember taking it out. There was no moment of decision he could point to. He thought of his mother. The way she'd looked at Wade and mistaken solidity for safety. The way she believed strength was something loud, something confident. He thought of how Wade had looked at him, not with care but with expectation. A flaw to be corrected, a thing to be hardened. He thought about the truck, packed with gear, food they never used, water they rationed wrong. All that suffering unnecessary, all of it born from pride pretending to be toughness. Wade had brought them here to prove something. Something that had never been true. And then there was hunger. Not the kind you complained about. Not the kind you planned around. This was hunger that rewrote the rules. Hunger that stripped away manners and memory and shame. Hunger that explained history. Why people in starving places had crossed lines they swore they never would. It reduced him to something simpler than human. Something with teeth, with need, with no room left for sentiment. His mind made a choice without asking him. Later, he would not remember the hours that followed. His brain would erase them, replace them with something cleaner. A story about tracking, about dear sign, about patience and skill and a single clean act. It would feel real, convincing, almost noble. That was not what happened. What happened was clumsy and frantic and wrong. He remembered watching his mother prepare chicken at the kitchen counter, how she'd shown him where joints separated, where the body yielded if you knew where to press. He remembered that now, and the memory guided his hands. Wade's body was colder than it should have been. The flesh resisted him, stiffened. The blade grew slick, blood layered over blood. He took only what he could carry, wrapped it in Wade's canvas jacket. He couldn't look at it directly, couldn't allow it a past or a name. It had to be an object, a resource, something acquired, something required. Even then, his mind was already retreating, already building the lie that would let him survive what he'd done. That night the fire burned steady and clean. He'd learned quickly, things Wade never had. He cooked the meat slowly on a flat stone. He refused to call it anything else. The smell made his throat tight, made his mouth flood. Revulsion and desire collided inside him, his body fighting itself. When it was ready, charred on the outside, still pink within, he ate. His stomach rebelled, cramped, tried to purge it, but he forced it down, swallowed again and again until something finally broke. Not his body. Something deeper. A boundary. As he ate, he thought about Wade, about how his stepfather had dragged him into the woods to make him a man, about how, in the end, that was exactly what happened, just not the way Wade had imagined. And somewhere in his head, Wade's voice surfaced, calm and certain as ever. You did what was necessary. This time the boy didn't argue. To survive. After that, time stopped behaving like time. Days melted together, indistinct and colorless. He drifted through the forest as if underwater, letting the creek decide for him. Water always went somewhere. That was enough logic to keep moving. When his body demanded it, he returned to the clearing. Each visit, the shape on the ground looked less familiar, less recognizable. Eventually, his mind stopped assigning it a name. It was no longer Wade. It wasn't even human. It was fuel, nothing more than that. His body began to fail in quieter, stranger ways. His gums bled at the lightest touch. His joints throbbed as if decades had been stacked onto him overnight. Bruises bloomed across his arms and legs without reason or memory. But he was still walking, still breathing, still alive. That was all that mattered. Somewhere around the 7th day, the last barrier gave way. His mind, desperate and efficient, rewrote everything. The jagged memories smoothed out. The panic dissolved. What remained was a story he could carry. He had hunted. He had found a deer by the creek, a young buck injured, helpless. He had ended it cleanly, using Wade's knife the way Wade would have approved of. His stepfather had died passing on the final truth. Survival demanded action, not hesitation. This version felt solid, detailed, real. He could see the animal's dark eyes, could remember the stillness before the kill, the strange calm. He remembered dressing the body the way Wade had once explained, the way men had done it for generations. He could hear Wade's voice guiding him, steady and instructive, present even in death. This story had weight. This story let him live. By the time he stumbled onto the road, a narrow logging track barely worthy of the name, he believed it completely. The ranger who found him called for help immediately. The boy was thin but not wasted, pale but stable. He spoke clearly, calmly. He explained the heart failure, the days alone, the deer, the way he'd survived. The ranger asked him to repeat certain details. He did without faltering. He gave them a location, or close enough to one. The search team found the remains within hours. What they discovered puzzled them at first. The damage was severe, too much for easy conclusions. The report would later note extensive scavenger activity, exposure time. But the heart had failed. That much was undeniable. The evidence was there, clear once they examined what was left. Everything else fit the story. The wilderness had done the rest. No one asked questions that mattered. And the boy never corrected them. No one ever thought to question the marks left behind. Why would they? He had already explained the knife. He had already given them the animal, tools mixed with flesh in the wild. Everyone knew that happened. It fit neatly, too neatly. The story closed itself. A man with a hidden weakness pushed beyond his limits. A boy endured. Luck, instinct, just enough knowledge. Survival. That was all anyone saw. In the hospital, the world returned in small, gentle offerings. Applesauce on a plastic spoon. Orange juice cold and sweet, so good it almost hurt. His mother sat beside him, fingers wrapped tight around his hand like she might lose him if she let go. She cried quietly, again and again, apologizing for things she couldn't name. She asked if Wade had been cruel, if anything had happened that he wanted to say out loud. He shook his head. Wade had been teaching him, even at the end, especially at the end. That answer seemed to soothe her. It wasn't a lie, not really, just a cleaner shape of the truth. The psychiatrist arrived with a clipboard and calm eyes. She asked careful questions. He answered them easily. He spoke about fear without shaking, about hunger without panic, about loss without visible fracture. He appeared grateful, stable, intact. Her notes reflected what she saw: resilience, emotional processing, no recurring distress, no signs that required concern. The experience, she wrote, might even strengthen him over time. Confidence, independence, a hard lesson absorbed. She recommended a few check-ins, nothing urgent. If only she understood how accurate she was. After 3 days, they let him go. Home felt smaller than he remembered. The walls of his room closed in gently, lined with old posters and quiet dust. Safety hung in the air, heavy and exhausting. That night the forest returned to him, but softened, ordered. In the dream, he stood in a clearing with steady hands. A deer waited for him there, calm and unafraid. When he raised the knife, the animal met his eyes, not with terror, but with acceptance. It lowered its head. He woke sweating, heart steady. The dream lingered like truth. In the morning, his mother cooked eggs and toast. She watched him eat as if counting every bite, as if presence itself could protect him. He ate without hesitation, without pleasure, without thought. The food filled him, but it carried no taste. She asked what he wanted to do: see friends, talk, rest, anything. He told her he just wanted to sit for a while. And she nodded, relieved, believing still that her boy had come back whole. In a way, he had. He said he needed sleep, that the walk back had hollowed him out. His mother accepted that answer immediately, relief softening her shoulders as she left him alone. In his room, the city spread itself beyond the window, traffic humming, lights flickering on, people moving with purpose toward dinners and deadlines. A world built on choices that never demanded blood. A world that would never ask what it cost to stay alive. He opened the drawer where he kept the few things that mattered. The knife rested there, clean, folded into cloth like something fragile. He had asked to keep it. No one objected. A keepsake made sense to them, something to remember a man by. He unwrapped it slowly. The metal flashed in the afternoon light, dull and honest. Not a weapon, not a symbol, just an instrument. Something that cut, separated, solved problems when there were no better options. He wrapped it again, returned it to the drawer, closed it gently. That night, he lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling until his mother called him for dinner. The weeks passed. He ate everything placed in front of him. His body filled out. Color returned to his face. Strength settled back into his limbs like it had never left. At school, people looked at him differently now, awed, impressed, curious. A survivor, someone who had been tested and come back. They asked what it was like out there, alone. He told them it was brutal, that fear stripped you down, that you discovered what you could endure, that his stepfather had taught him more than either of them had planned. All of that was true, just not in the way they understood. No nightmares followed him, no crushing shame. Whatever part of the mind was meant to fracture under such weight had instead rearranged itself. A story had formed, clean, coherent, livable, and his thoughts clung to it without resistance. He learned then how deep the human mind could bury a thing when staying sane depended on it. Sometimes late at night, fragments surfaced, the hush of trees, cold water over stone, decisions made without permission from conscience. But they arrived muted, distant, like scenes from a film he'd watched long ago. In the version of events that mattered, the one his mind protected, he had survived with skill and resolve. He had honored a final lesson. He had done what people had always done to endure. The rest lay somewhere far away, dissolving quietly into soil and memory. Truth, he understood now, was flexible when danger had passed. And that understanding stayed with him. He carried that knowledge quietly. That memory could be edited. That belief was often just comfort wearing the mask of truth. That he could sit under warm lights, pass a bowl across a table, and never taste what hunger had once forced on him. The mind, he learned, was not loyal to facts. It was loyal to survival. Maybe that was the final inheritance. Not lessons about flame or trails or animals, but the ability to cross a line, live through it, and seal the door behind you. To shoulder a weight that would shatter you if you named it. To keep breathing without looking back. The knife stayed with him for years, hidden in a drawer wherever he lived. Not as evidence, not as guilt, as proof that he had endured something and remained standing. Eventually, life unfolded the way life does. College, work, distance, new rooms, new cities. The blade always traveled with him, wrapped and silent. He never returned to the woods, never felt the urge. When asked, he would smile politely and say he'd had enough of nature for one lifetime. People accepted that. They thought they understood. They didn't, and he was grateful for that. Some truths are safer when they remain untranslated. Time moved on, unconcerned with what it buried. Years later, after his mother passed, he sorted through her belongings in the quiet apartment. Dust, old photographs, small artifacts of a life lived carefully. In a box labeled with his stepfather's name, he found a report folded among receipts and letters. A diagnosis, a warning, a heart that could fail under strain. Clear instructions never shared. Wade had known. He sat with that realization for a long time, wondered what the trip had truly been. A challenge, a confession, an ending chosen in advance. Whether the man had been proving something or surrendering to it, whether he had expected to return at all. It didn't matter. The outcome stood unchanged. He burned the paper with the photographs, watched the words curl and vanish. Some details were better left unrecorded. He kept the watch, placed it in the drawer beside the knife. Not as a memorial, as a reminder. That forgetting was never complete. That survival leaves marks no one else can see. That somewhere deep inside, a younger version of himself still knew exactly what it had taken to walk back out of those trees. And he carried that knowledge forward, quietly, the way one carries a scar beneath clothing, unseen, undeniable, and forever his. Listening to the quiet rhythm of the house, the steady breathing of his children, the soft hum of the city beyond the windows, the memory of those woods, of hunger, of fear, of what he had been forced to become, was never far, tucked behind his ribs like a small, persistent weight. He pressed his hand to his chest again, not out of fear, but to remind himself that he was still here, still whole, still alive. He thought of Wade, not with hatred, not with longing, but as a chapter of his life that had forged him in ways no one could ever understand. The boy he had been, the man he had become, they existed in tandem, a constant dialogue between past and present. That boy knew what survival demanded, what cost it carried, and the man carried that knowledge forward, tempered by years of reflection and restraint. He had learned to protect what was sacred, his family, his life, his integrity, to teach without breaking, to guide without cruelty, to live fully while holding shadows at bay. Some lessons were brutal, some invisible, but they were his alone. The knife in the drawer, the scars on his memory, the stories rewritten in his mind, they were proof of that. And as he lay there in the dark, watching the rise and fall of chests around him, he understood fully that survival was more than living. It was carrying forward quietly with patience, with grace, and with the unwavering knowledge of what it had taken to arrive at this moment. The past had shaped him, but it did not define him. The boy, the man, and the ghosts of the woods existed together now. But the man led, steady, deliberate, unshaken, and finally at peace. He remembered the woods, the way they had smelled that November, the sharp bite of frost in the air, the slow decay of leaves turning copper and gold. He felt again the quiet rhythm of Wade's breathing across the fire, the knife heavy in his hand, and that moment when choice had vanished, leaving only necessity. The memory of the deer surfaced too, calm, almost reverent, its dark eyes fixed on him as if it understood. He knew it wasn't real, not the way he remembered, but it had saved him. It had let him live, let him become the man he was now. A husband, a father, a man who ran his life quietly, responsibly, carefully. Decades rolled on. His children grew, spread into the world like seeds in the wind. His wife retired, dreaming of distant mountains and trails. She begged him to come along to see forests he had once feared and revered in equal measure. He declined. Knees stiffened with age, crowds unnerving, and the city had become his comfort, his boundary. She traveled with friends, sending pictures of snow-capped peaks and golden valleys. He looked at them and felt nothing. The woods had become just a collection of trees. The ghosts he'd carried for half a century seemed buried, or so he told himself. On his 65th birthday, the weight of years pressed him into action. He drove to the trailhead he hadn't seen in 50 years. Asphalt replaced dirt paths. Solar panels hummed beside information kiosks. Rules and permits were posted where once there had been only silence. Yet the trees were unchanged. He sat in the car, staring, remembering Wade's truck parked right here, packs laid bare, the boy he had been watching silently, trembling. Finally, he stepped out. The November light slanted through the canopy the same way it had all those years ago. A lone crow called from a distance, its voice unchanged. He thought of walking in, of tracing the path to the place where Wade had died, of speaking aloud the truth he had carried for 50 years. But the trees would not listen. The sky would not care. There was only him, and he had been carrying it all this time. Words could not lessen the weight. He turned back. His footsteps crunched over gravel as he returned to the car. The engine hummed to life. As the wheels rolled over the asphalt, he understood something vital. Survival was never about revisiting the past, about confessing to the world. It was about living with it silently, carrying both memory and consequence forward without letting them define him. He drove away, the forest shrinking in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in 50 years, he felt the barest hint of release. The woods kept their secrets, so did he. He pulled into the driveway just after dark. When his wife asked where he'd gone, he told her he needed air. She accepted it without pressing, as she had learned to do over the years. Silence had become one of the shapes of their marriage, familiar, harmless, unquestioned. Later, alone in the bedroom, he opened the drawer. The knife lay where it always had, wrapped with care, preserved like an artifact. He held it beneath the soft glow of the lamp. The edge still caught the light. He had kept it sharp out of habit or maybe superstition, prepared for a moment he knew would never return. He considered throwing it away, imagined the relief of an empty drawer. But that felt dishonest. like erasing a chapter that had already carved itself into him. He folded the cloth back around the blade and returned it to its place. Some things weren't meant to be discarded. Some costs were paid not once, but daily, by waking up and continuing. He slipped into bed. His wife turned in her sleep, her hand finding his without effort, warm and trusting. He held it gently and stared at the ceiling. He thought of the boy he once was, the child who had stood in the woods and chosen to live when living demanded something unforgivable. That boy had built a story sturdy enough to stand inside, a version of events that made breathing possible. The man he became had spent decades reinforcing it, repeating it until it felt solid, until it felt true. Was that a sin? He no longer knew. He only knew the alternative had been death, and death would have taught nothing. Survival had. Sleep arrived without ceremony, without dreams. No punishment came, no absolution either. Morning followed as it always did. Coffee, news, calls to his children. Another ordinary day earned the only way it ever had been. Somewhere far away, the forest still stood. Leaves fell. Snow came and went. Whatever remained of the past was scattered, broken down by weather and time, beyond recognition, beyond discovery. The knife remained in the drawer. And the man continued on, carrying his secret the way one carries a stone beneath the ribs, smooth, heavy, permanent. Not something that grew lighter, but something you learned to balance. Because living was what he had done, what he would keep doing. The woods remembered. So did he. And between those two memories lived a truth that would never be spoken, never confessed, never released, only endured. It was nothing more and nothing less than a boy choosing to live. Everything that came after, every year, every habit, every silence, unfolded from that single moment of terrible necessity. The knife remained in the drawer. The man remained in the world. And the space between what had happened and what was remembered stretched wider with time, thinning the edges of memory until even he could no longer see across it. The lie settled in, then softened, then hardened into something indistinguishable from truth. Eventually, it became a story about someone else, a long time ago, in woods that might as well have never existed. All that was left was an aging man, a knife he never used, and a story told so often it no longer felt borrowed. It felt owned. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone was ever given. A version of events you could survive inside. A version of yourself you could endure. These thoughts drifted through him as sleep approached. Wade's face flickered in firelight, eyes searching, measuring, confirming. The boy watching, not yet understanding what he was witnessing. The man that boy became. Then the thought stopped. Sleep took him gently, down into a darkness without dreams, without judgment. No accusations waited there. No voices rose from the past. There was only rest and the quiet relief of being unobserved. The woods could keep what they knew. He would keep what he carried. Time would do what it always did, move forward, indifferent and unstoppable, until memory thinned, then vanished, until no one remained who could name what had been lost. Only the trees would remain. Not witnesses, not judges. Just standing in the pale November light, patient and unmoved, waiting for the next thing to die beneath their branches. The way they always had. The way they always would.